I think I often work better with other people. And so, like, more often than generating the ideas, I think I'm better at taking the kernel of an idea and then expanding it and going from there. And so oftentimes for me, it'll start with the stuff that I've worked on that I like the most is I've come up with the kernel and then put it aside for a little bit and then come back to it almost as if I just found it somewhere else, and then can respond to it and react to it and have that kind of dialogue with the musical idea.
This episode has been 3 years in the making. We finally made it happen, and in person. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we're talking today with Andrew Reinartz, who is a fellow South Dakotan. He remains in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where we both grew up. So we talk about that and much more. We had the idea to do this at my brother's wedding in 2018. I think we both had maybe a few too many to drink that night, and it didn't happen the next day. And boy, then a whole bunch of things happened, including a pandemic and many other things. But we managed to get together at my mom's house in the backyard here in early August 2021. And it was so cool to catch up with Andrew and chat about his career and about Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And I think that a lot of people can relate to what we're talking about here. People in smaller markets, mid-markets. I live in San Francisco. I lived in Chicago. I talk with a lot of people who are in big markets like that. And while that's cool, I think that what Andrew and I talk about and the way that he has built his career and does what he does, I think that's relatable to a lot of people here. And finally, getting back to doing in-person podcasts. Oh my goodness, I have missed this. Christian Fabian was the last person I chatted with in person for the podcast. That was February 2020, just before the pandemic broke out. So great to get back to in-person conversations, and I hope that there are many more of these coming in the future. Quick shout out to our sponsors, Upton Bass, Ear Trumpet Labs, and Dorico. More on them later, but let's dive into this conversation in person with Andrew Reinartz. So the last time I busted out this gear was February 2020.
Oh,
in
yeah.
Moscow, Idaho, the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival.
Yeah,
And I thought I was going to do another 30 of these interviews, last year. Didn't happen. And so it's great to be sitting down with you, my first live chat since the pandemic hit. So,
Yeah.
and we talked about doing this in 2018, I think, my brother's wedding.
It was that long
and I remember,
ago.
and I think I had a few too many and had to sleep it off. But it's good. It's good to sit down. So thanks for chatting, man.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
And I'm from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. You're from Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Yep.
Did you grow up here?
I did. Yep.
Okay.
Born and raised. Yep.
Okay.
And I think I know you and I didn't play together much. I was just too young, but I do know a couple of times when I was in high school playing with the Augustana University College Community Orchestra, and you were back for the holidays. You came and played one or two concerts and kind of sat in. Because I remember it was when you were using the classical footrest.
Yeah.
Still sitting at that point, and then doing the thing all of us bass players do, where we're like, okay, this is a totally unergonomic instrument. How do I manage to make this thing work?
It's been a long time since I did that. Yeah, because I went through a period. Yeah, I always had the guitar footstool, and then when I started at college, I was trying to sit like feet flat on the floor.
Yeah,
and
kind
then,
of the Bradatich thing.
Yeah. And then 15 years ago, maybe I just decided I need to learn how to stand, and so I've just been standing unless it's a long gig.
Same for me, because I'm doubling, playing, anymore I probably play mostly jazz and then, other, pop rock music, but still play with the South Dakota Symphony. But finally I said I'm going to stand even for the symphony stuff, because I was tired of getting my bow technique and my intonation down two different ways.
Well, I found, being somebody who sat like forever and then started standing, like it's easier for me to go from standing to sitting. If I get addicted to sitting, and then I can't play standing, and I'm left-handed anyway, so I feel like standing kind of evens. I've always felt like my right arm's the more deficient one, so that seems to work for me. But it's it's interesting. In San Francisco, for whatever reason, a lot of people stand, including people in the symphony. But we've played some, like the Harry Potter shows have come through town, and we would do 5 shows, and everybody started off standing in the bass section for show 1, and everybody was sitting by show 5. So I think it's circumstantial.
Yep.
So I was thinking, so more people who listen to this podcast kind of do not exactly what you do, but more like what you like. I've talked to all sorts of people. I've talked to like Ed Barker and the Boston Symphony. It's awesome, but like most people don't do what Ed Barker does. But I think a lot of people, me included, especially for certain times of my life, like put things together and make it work. And I was remembering kind of early on in the pandemic, I was talking to Bobby Sharman, who is a bass player in Omaha.
Okay.
I think he is still in Omaha right now, but he was kind of working in Omaha, working in Lincoln, playing some jazz, playing some classical. And you seem to have done that, but even like a more fleshed out portfolio in terms of so like I just think it's cool to hear, because I've been hearing about what you've been doing for decades at this point, and like making a career in a, I don't know if you want to call it a mid-market or a small mid-market, like and all the different hats you wear. So maybe we can talk about whatever, but can we maybe talk, like, just can you like run through like your suite of activities? And I know we've had this weird year and a half, so if your suite of activities in 2019 or what's coming back, or just like what's on your plate right now in terms of what you do.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like you said, it's definitely a combination of a few things. One is just to survive as a creative person anywhere, but especially in these kinds of markets, you just have to wear a bunch of hats and you do a little bit of everything. And then also I've been lucky in that I was always interested in a lot of different types of music. While I was starting to play with the Symphony in high school, I was on, Friday and Saturday nights playing with my punk rock band in basement shows. And, luckily kind of everyone needs a bass player of some sort. So you get a wide experience of a lot of different types of music. So I'm a member of the section for the South Dakota Symphony, which is actually celebrating its 100th year this upcoming season, which is really exciting, including actually a world premiere of a new John Luther Adams piece that he's doing for the orchestra in celebration. So I play with the Symphony, as a per-service player, but playing many of those concerts. I play with a number of different jazz groups. In particular, the JAS Quintet is the main jazz group that I work with, and a number of other ones around, including educational activities with the Sioux Falls Jazz and Blues Society, doing school shows, touring the state, bringing jazz and kind of a history lesson through the lens of jazz to schools. I work with a lot of, kind of folk or singer-songwriter oriented folks, Jamie Lynn chief among them, Eliza Blue, Darren Kaihai, and then also play electric bass in a kind of a rock band, Barry Marshall. I play the Holiday Jam with the Hegg Brothers, which is a 13-show holiday show every year with a number of people out of Omaha and Sioux Falls and Minneapolis, and a bunch of pickup gigs, kind of stuff that comes through. Anyone needs a bass player, Broadway shows touring through, stuff like that. So I think, again, part of it is being someone with a foot in a bunch of different worlds. I have the classical world, I have the improvisation and the jazz world, a little bit of the pop world, but can read, and so it's easy to jump into a bunch of different situations, and then have a day job somehow as well. But luckily enough, still in a creative world. I'm the community development director with Art South Dakota. We're a statewide nonprofit advocacy and support group, kind of helping artists and arts organizations around the state.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. Yep.
I can't believe that the Symphony is celebrating its 100th anniversary. I was in the South Dakota Symphony from I think it was 1991 to 1994 or something like that.
Yep.
Like
yep.
High school. And so you were in high school as well?
Yep. So I would have been right after that. I would have been in like 98 is probably when I started. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's one of the things that I think is interesting, that a lot of people, especially like I spent most of my life now actually living in Chicago, or now last 5-6 years in San Francisco, and like none of my students got to play with the San Francisco or Chicago Symphony, or even like the Elgin Symphony or any of the regional groups. And I think that's one of the interesting things. And I think Sioux Falls has changed, certainly in the 25 years since I've been here. So probably it's likely people aren't doing that. But even so, like it's. And I've talked to other people who are from 100,000, 200,000, 250,000, area places, and you get access a lot of times. And correct me if I'm wrong, but like cities around that size, you have enough cultural activity coming through, but you don't necessarily have the depth, the bench that you might in like a larger metro area. So sometimes, like I think back and I'm like, how lucky was I at 15? I was playing the Sioux City Symphony, and we had the fifth symphony year, everybody's fifth symphony. Mm-hmm. So at 15, I played Mahler 5, which I would love to. I wish I would have videotaped Jason hacking through Mahler 5.
Right,
I had never even seen 5 flats, and then Ray Charles came and played with the South Dakota Symphony. So it's like, wow, I'm on stage with Ray Charles, and it's interesting the level of. And just looking at some of my high school students who've gone on to do great things. I mean, the even though you might not have the same access to like major soloists, or maybe you're not going to go see like one of the top 5 orchestras every day, you have a different kind of access in like more of a mid-market place.
Yeah, it's much more experiential. I think you're able to really jump into the thick of it, and the thing that I've liked about especially Sioux Falls in this area has continued to grow is that, like you were saying, there's enough of a critical mass to entice really high quality guests to come through, but at the same time we're small enough that if you want to see something happen, you have to do it, mm-hmm. and you get to do it. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you're sitting there going, I really want to get a jazz ensemble rolling. You're not sitting there going, okay, well, no clubs are letting new people play. There's no way to get in. It's been that one guy that's been doing it for 45 years. I've got no hope of getting in. So it allows you to, the double-edged sword. The good of it is you get to do these things and try things and really be a musical entrepreneur, but on the other hand, you have to do it. You don't get to sit back and just wait for someone else to make the scene happen.
Yeah. Did you start on bass?
I did. Yep. I started on bass. I started on upright bass in 4th grade, and then quickly picked up electric bass after that. Actually still have my first electric bass, but it's with a friend of mine now. And my now father-in-law actually helped my dad pick that bass out for me, which is a fun story. But yeah, started on bass, also played trombone, but stopped that at the end of high school, and dabble on guitar and piano and things, but primarily a bass player for sure.
Okay. Did you did your parents play music? Was your family musical?
Yeah, so sort of. My dad was really supportive, but he can't carry a tune or can't sing in pitch. Happy Birthday is always really exciting. It's kind of a nice, almost Sprechstimme version every time he does it. But my mom was very musical, led the church choir, played acoustic guitar, and they were all really supportive of kind of pursuing a creative endeavors and getting deeper into it for sure.
I am so proud to have my course with Discover Double Bass Beginner's Classical Bass out in the world. This was a long time coming, friends, and this course is designed, as the name implies, for beginner bassists who want to learn how to play classical music, or for more experienced players who wish to revisit the foundations of technique. The course is comprised of 66 lessons over 4 hours and covers a wide range of topics on classical bass, which will make a real difference to you playing. It is the perfect course for beginners. I feel weird saying that since it's my course, but I definitely believe in it, to build a solid foundation of double bass technique and to help you feel confident playing. Many of the lessons include transcriptions of the pieces, exercises, and etudes, so you have everything you need to practice at home. I spent hundreds of hours putting this together over the last few years. I'm so glad to see it out in the world. We have a link to it in the show notes, or just visit discoverdoublebase.com/Jason Heath. This episode is brought to you by Ear Trumpet Labs. They make an incredible mic for upright bass called the Nadine, and 6-time Grammy-winning jazz bassist and former Contrabass Conversations guest, Christian McBride, is a big fan. Christian says, as an acoustic bassist, it's very important for me to have this instrument amplified as naturally as possible. What I love about this microphone is that it makes the instrument sound exactly how I hear it in my head. Honestly, I don't know if you can get a better review than that. The Nadine is an instrument-mounted condenser mic with an incredibly clear, natural sound and great feedback rejection. Ear Trumpet Labs is offering a free t-shirt with mic purchase from their website. Just visit www.eartrumpetLabs.com/contrabass to claim yours and learn more about Nadine. I got into it, like I didn't know what I was going to do in 7th grade, but by 8th grade, I started playing in this punk band called Toxic Death.
Yep.
Great. I think we played one gig and broke up. It was one of those bands, and knew I wanted to do music, and then I wanted to quit orchestra. Mom wouldn't let me, so I started playing upright bass, and now I don't even know. I think I left my electric bass somewhere in Chicago at some point, but so I knew I was going to do something with this by 8th grade.
Yep.
Did you have a moment, or did you have a moment when you knew that you're going to do this kind of thing?
I think, I don't know if I knew it would be whatever of a career that it is, but I knew pretty early on that music was going to be a pretty big part of my life. I think that it was probably when I started writing original music and playing original music. I mean, I loved orchestra, and I think for me, even though there's more, well, I shouldn't say that. For me, I think orchestrally it was getting to play some Beethoven. I mean, just that compositionally really grabbed me. But then writing music and performing and starting to improvise, it was an expressive outlet that I don't know if I had otherwise. And I knew right away that no matter what else I do, this is going to be a big part of what I do going forward.
How'd you get into jazz? Did you? Because I asked. So I got into jazz in the school system in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and went to the National High School Music Institute in Chicago. I think I was maybe 16, 17. And it was really interesting to meet all these other people. I think I was the only person from South Dakota that year, and everyone was talking about what their influences were, and I said, "Oh, my influences are the people I'm playing with in Sioux Falls," which everybody thought was peculiar because everyone else was saying like Coltrane or Miles Davis or like I live in the Bay Area and my teacher does this or that. So, but my recollection, this is going back to like early '90s, is there was it wasn't there weren't dozens and dozens of players, but there was some pretty decent players that really, and I remember going after school to one of the middle schools, one of the teachers, and I'm blanking on his name, of course, but we would like do jazz ensemble after school, like outside of school, and read tunes, and I remember like getting deep into it in the schools. How'd you get into it?
So I got into it pretty late. I loved playing in jazz band in schools, but at that time there wasn't really as much of a culture. It's kind of come and gone. There wasn't as much of a culture in the schools of small ensemble jazz. It was all big band, and I liked it. There's a power to big band music that you just can't deny. But I'm much more of a small ensemble improvisatory jazz kind of person, and loved it. It was probably, I think I was in 8th grade and asked a buddy of mine who had a teacher, because I didn't start taking private lessons until into high school, and you said, hey, I'm really liking this jazz band stuff. What should I listen to? And said, well, you got to get a Miles Davis record. So I went to Barnes & Noble and bought Bitches Brew, which was at the time, an interesting entree into that world. I didn't understand it at all yet, but knew there was something there, and was just really intrigued and really listened a lot. And it wasn't until, honestly, probably partway through college that I got an opportunity to start playing some more combo jazz. It was just other, kind of like you were saying, it was just other guys. We just wanted to put something together outside of our formal school, and started playing a bunch of book tunes and getting deeper into it, and then just fell in love. And from there, it was just kind of absorbing as much as I could, just through osmosis. And luckily, it was right around the time that stuff was getting more accessible with the internet. It's not like now. I'm jealous of all my students now with all the resources available, and even just being able to listen to anything and not have to go to the record store and just try to comb through the CDs or the albums to find, some of that was a great discovery though of, oh, hey, Ron Carter played on this too, and this, because he plays on, thousands of everybody's records, and you start to figure that out, and you start to see who produced things, and but I'm jealous of that access. But yeah, for me, it was a lot later in life that I really fell in love with it.
Yeah, the access to the music, that's the thing that's crazy. So I'm a couple years more like your senior, but we're kind of generally the same. And I worked at the Northwestern Music Library.
Yeah.
And like all the jazz records I discovered were just walking around the entire back wall of that library was just the jazz collection. So I go and pull the LPs.
Yep.
And let's pull all the LPs and go through and look at the back. And But, I didn't do much in South Dakota, or then I'd go and I'd spend like $18 on one CD, and maybe I made the right buy. And it's crazy to me, and it really levels the playing field in a lot of ways. Like if you're in a small town in Brazil, or you're in a small town anywhere in the world, and you got a decent internet connection, you can go down the rabbit hole in a pretty serious way. So that's a major thing that I think has changed the last couple decades. But where'd you go to college anyway? I think I knew at some point.
Yeah, I actually went to Augustana University. So I was originally, I was the kind, not totally so, but I graduated from high school and thought, I'm getting out of Sioux Falls, I'm getting out of South Dakota, and I'm never looking back. Not that I had a bad experience, but I think that's everybody's, wherever you're from, you want to go somewhere else, and had narrowed it down to University of Minnesota, which has a fantastic, a lot of great bass world between St. Paul Chamber Orchestra and Minneapolis Symphony. I mean, you can never go wrong with Clute being around the neighborhood. But got great scholarships to Augie, and quite frankly, part of it was I had the opportunity to start playing with the South Dakota Symphony. And so I kind of figured that having a professional experience with that group while in college was worth more than having maybe a better orchestral program at the university I was at, and loved it. I was a bizarre person. I did music, computer science, and philosophy, and so kind of just tried to dive head on in, and that's the other thing that I could do at a smaller liberal arts college that you couldn't do at larger universities.
Wow, I didn't know that you did that. That's a cool degree. The James Clute. There's so many people that people listening may or may not know the name, but he's this legendary teacher who was in the Minnesota Orchestra for a long time. Minneapolis, where the Minnesota Orchestra is only like 3.5 hours or so from Sioux Falls. So my teacher was named Chuck Kreitzer. When I was growing up, he was the principal bass of the South Dakota Symphony at the time, right? Yeah, sorry, Chuck, if I'm screwing this up. But so Chuck encouraged me to go take some lessons with Clute, and then like the principal bass in San Francisco Symphony, Scott Pingle, he studied with Clute in high school. I know a lot of people who did, and so yes, Clute's like this. He had a huge influence. Did you ever get a lesson?
Just briefly,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I just got kind of one or two real brief ones, but it was great. He was a very mentor type teacher, would really hone in on what you needed to work on next, but would kind of in short order get you at least to see the next level, to know, okay, now this is the work I got to do to get up there, kind of thing.
I thought about going to the University of Minnesota, and I know a lot of my high school, I at the time, people said there was an area of Minneapolis they called Little South Dakota. I'm not sure if that was a term only the South Dakotans called it, or if it really, but like then the reciprocal tuition, at least at the time they had, like that was an attractive option. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought about all sorts of options and just ended up, actually it's because I was playing in South Dakota Jazz Band, big band. I met the jazz band director at Northwestern, who has a reputation, or had a reputation of just like picking off certain players and kind of recruiting them for Northwestern. That's totally. Then I went to the High School Institute, met Jeff Raditich, and I just that's how I ended up in Chicago. But I very well could. I wasn't looking to leave. I think a lot of people. Well, I think people are itching to get out of wherever they're from. My high school students in San Francisco are like, I got to get out of San Francisco. Like, okay. So I think maybe that's like a universal instinct wherever you're from.
Yeah. Wherever you're from, you think that community, and then the one nice thing though, the other thing with Sioux Falls that I've really liked is I like being in a community that's growing and in a state that there's a real depth to the creative world in South Dakota that I've learned more and more of working for my day job with Art South Dakota. But we're often just so isolated from each other, and the more we're connected, there's so much happening here, and it's great to feel like it's in a growing creative community and not one that's at a stasis or kind of on a decline. There's an excitement to that.
Well, and it's interesting because I left Sioux Falls in 1994 and have really just visited, and so at that point, they had this high school that I actually went to high school at that they had decided to create a performing arts center out of. Fast forward, I forget how many years, and actually that became the new home of the South Dakota Symphony, which is this awesome performing arts center. And then as I visited over the decades now at this point, I've got to see things pop up. You get a lot hipper, every couple of years I come back and I realize, and so it's, how's it grown since like your time at Augustana? I mean, it looks like it's grown a lot to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the music scene in particular has just exploded. I mean, the South Dakota Symphony has been a big part of that. You get a lot of great players coming to play. They do have, a full-time contingent of musicians and then the per service, so you get a good culture of good education around that. They've also started a youth orchestra, and so you're getting kind of a full youth through adult kind of education and exposure. But then also, I mean, the jazz scene has really come back. I mean, there have always been people that have been fighting to keep it going. Touch of Europe was kind of the jazz club probably when you were here too. And then they closed down, and we were kind of looking for a home for a long time. But there's just a lot of great players, a lot of great scene going on there. And it feels... more so than other communities I've visited, it feels very collaborative. You're a lot more likely to have... So, for instance, the group I play with, JAS Quintet, Jeff Paul is just unbelievable. He's the principal oboist with the Symphony, just a very fine double reed player. But then he's also the keyboardist in the JAS Quintet and is a wonderful improvising musician. When he was at Eastman, did a lot of work in the improvising world as well. And actually is a great saxophone player if you ever get him on sax, and played with a band. Now the guys are all knee body, but played in a band with those guys back at Eastman. And,
cool.
So it's this kind of collision of multiple worlds that I think is a little easier to have happen in a smaller community still. But then I think that just there's been a revitalization of downtown, and so there's been a lot more places that want live music and a little bit more of a value on some of the gallery spaces and just performing arts generally.
This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the advanced music notation software from Steinberg. And one of the things that is a very intentional decision, but also a little perplexing if you're coming from other pieces of software, is that when you start, there's no time signature. It's just a single quarter rest. That opens the door for so much creativity. And here is Daniel Spreadbury, Senior Product Manager of Dorico, on why they made that design decision.
We really wanted to make it clear that when you start a piece of music in Dorico, it's really like starting from a blank piece of paper, no matter how true that really is in Sibelius and Finale, because of course you can change all those things, sometimes at a cost. If you've already written some music in Finale and then you change the time signature, you can have a lot of ties and all sorts of other stuff to clean up, which you won't have in Dorico. But it's just that kind of hopefully inviting. I mean, some people might say, oh, it's a bit daunting. There's literally nothing there but 1 quarter rest. I've got to decide everything. But yes, you do. You're the creative person. You do have to decide everything.
This is one of the many design decisions that I think is totally brilliant in Dorico. It has opened the door for my own personal creativity, and it's such a beautiful product. I can't say enough good things about it. I use it every single day. There is a free version, Dorico SC, that gives you practically all the options that the full version of Dorico gives you, up to 2 stabs. So if you're doing bass duets or any kind of duets like that or exercises, that's more than enough. Dorico.com will take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. At Upton Bass, there is no B stock in terms of wood. Here's Gary and Eric from Upton on what happens when they encounter a flaw in the wood.
Rather than someone just looking at that piece of wood and saying, man, I got to throw that in the fireplace.
Yeah.
They go, my boss says I got to get this thing done, so they set that neck.
Yeah. And we've just learned over the years, if you got to question the piece of wood, it just goes in the dumpster.
Yeah, just get out of there.
It's reasons like that make Upton such a hit among bassists worldwide. They have an army of raving fans. I'm one of them, by the way, and they just make wonderful basses. Whether you're just starting out and you're looking for an entry-level instrument or you're looking for the top-notch bass of your dreams, they will work with you throughout the process and get you an instrument you will love. UptonBass.com is the website, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. It's trippy. I would never have expected downtown to look like it does, and I mean every year it's like a welcome surprise to come back and see. Like, I was just at Monk's, where I've been going for, I don't even know, since they opened probably. Yeah. Every time I come back, this awesome ale house, and across the street was like, I don't know, it was like a union shop or something. I don't know. It was like and now I'm looking and I'm just seeing all these cool buildings transformed, and it's interesting. So what right now we're talking in 2021.
Yep.
hopefully at the tail end of this stinking pandemic. What are the jazz where do you hear live music in Sioux Falls these days?
So the main jazz club is our wine bar. It's run by a guy, Ricardo, and he's been great. He's been super supportive all through the pandemic, doing live music as long as we could and as safely as we could. And that's really become the home. You know, there's a Thursday night house gig there. They do a lot of Friday and Saturday music as well. And then, you know, we've kind of come and gone from different places, had some jazz nights going at the Pavilion, had some things. There's a lot of the breweries. Severance Brewing has a great jazz night. And then, you know, the other thing that I think has been really helpful is we did this first with the Pavilion and now with our wine bar, but we've been trying to get a jazz jam session back up and running just once a month, but it's just to have a pro rhythm section and a couple of horn players, and then, you know, doing the legit sign-up sheet and everything from students that are just learning how to play to other adults that are experienced or other pros, and just really having that kind of ability for young people to get in front of an audience with some pro players and really feel what it's like to do that and go, oh, okay, this is what I really want to do. You know, you learn a lot on the bandstand that you don't learn otherwise.
Right.
And so trying to just have that kind of I think every music and art scene needs a variety of ways in, and I think that's one thing that Sioux Falls has done really well.
That's cool. What describe the day job? Would you call it an arts admin job? Is that the kind of the bucket you fall into? Like, how'd you get into that? Did you think you'd be doing that? What's that experience been like?
Yeah, that was an interesting one. So I is one of those long answers, but the short version of the long answer is for about 10 years, I helped my good friend Paul Sanchez run the Dakota Sky International Piano Festival. So we founded that when we were 23, and it ran for we had a good run. It was a summer program, performances, then we had a full 2-week camp for a long time. And like a lot of nonprofits, it sort of ran its course. Paul hadn't been living here for the whole time. He's now a professor in South Carolina and is just doing amazing work. A great composer, great performer, and it was really fun to collaborate on that. But that kind of folded, and then was kind of doing other things, but had my foot really deeply in the nonprofit world, having also been on the South Dakota Symphony board and a number of other boards. And then this organization formed after a previous version of it folded, and there was still really a need. And so some strong arts advocates in the state formed this group. And then what didn't hurt is our executive director, Jim Spears, is the trumpet player that I work with all the time. And so he kind of knew me and my skill set, and I knew of their mission. And so as they were growing and expanding, the opportunity came, and it's great because we were already virtual before the pandemic because we're kind of spread out around the state to cover the whole state, and then also working with people that understand and value creative lives outside of work, and so it's not a fight to get a day off to go play a gig, you know.
Yeah.
And it's a great organization. We, our whole purpose is to advocate for the arts and to support artists and arts organizations. And so it's a great way to still be connected to a creative life.
So you're working with people all across the state of South Dakota. So my experience with South Dakota is basically Sioux Falls. Growing up here and going back, I have absolutely no idea what even things in Rapid City are like, let alone like Huron or Aberdeen or some of these other towns. Like, what's going on in the rest of the state? That's a horribly large question.
No,
what else is happening?
So it's a really interesting state. We're so spread out. Once about 7-8 years ago, I took a trip and circled the state, and I was camping the whole way. So I drove the south end of the state, camped up through the Black Hills, drove up the north side, visited my fiance at the time up north, and then came back and figured out that one way, if you took that circle and stretched it out into a line one way, you could drive one way to Buffalo, New York, or one way to Austin, Texas. So, we're just a huge state, and in many parts of the state, we're really isolated. If you're in Aberdeen, for instance, you're 3 hours from Fargo, 3 hours from Sioux Falls, 5 hours from Minneapolis, or if you're in Rapid City, you're 5 hours from any larger community. Mm-hmm. And so you get some really interesting sort of ecosystems that grow up around that, because if you're the hub for that region, anyone that's creative ends up kind of going towards these areas. And I knew there was a lot going on in the state, but my work with Art South Dakota really brought that to the fore, and the pandemic, in a weird way, highlighted that even more, where we were able, we're not normally a granting organization, but we were able to distribute some funds we got from some other foundations for an artist relief fund. It was small amounts of gifts, but it was at least a little bit of something to working artists, and we had 165 artists that we were able to fund, but they represented 45 different communities all across the state. And a lot of that is because we have 9 native nations with lands in South Dakota, and that's a huge portion of an economic driver and of a cultural identity in a lot of the native nation lands. But there's great professional, especially visual art, but even performing arts happening everywhere in the state. Lemon, South Dakota, which is really, that's 6.5 hours from Sioux Falls, and you're just in nowhere by the time you're up there. But they just started a new arts council during the pandemic. They have a world-class sculptor that was originally from the community that moved home and is really trying to build a creative world there. He's John Lopez, he's had the Prince of Monaco has purchased a number of his pieces, kind of like a worldwide phenom, but is back home and really making it work. And then there's great people. Eliza Blue lives in Bison, South Dakota, which for a long time, I don't know if this is still the case, but Bison was the furthest you could get from a McDonald's in the lower 48 states.
I don't know why the movie cough. That's hilarious.
Yeah, and so there's this great art happening everywhere and I think for a lot of these communities, many of them have the same struggles we all do of trying to convince city leaders and people that it's important, but then many of them are realizing the value, not just an economic engine, which it is, not just quality of life, but identity. DeSmet, South Dakota, is the home of Laura Ingalls Wilder, and they're proud of that. That's part of their identity. They have in 2 weeks they're having the Harvey Dunn plein air event because Harvey Dunn lived there for a number of years, and we I used to work with a film production company, and we stole this line from an investor in one of the films, but it kind of said that when the only stories you hear are told about elsewhere, you think that life is only lived elsewhere. And so this creative world that we can have in rural and smaller communities really shows that whether it's good, bad, all of the above, that life is lived here. You can create a life here, and it's not like, well, I have to go somewhere else before I can live. That was me after high school. I thought, I got to get out of here if I'm going to have a life. And then found that, no, there's a lot to do here, and there was a community that I was really passionate about.
Yeah, and in a country where you can drive by the same big box stores and the same gas stations, and you could be in Sacramento or Bakersfield or Iowa City or whatever. It's cool to realize what's really special. I spent 15 years playing up in Door County, Wisconsin, which is very small population, but they're so proud of their history up there, and it's really cool. And you're up there and you spend time. I've probably spent the equivalent of a year of my life at least up there. It's so cool. These Viking ceremonies from back in the they reenact every summer. The Rapid City is a place that I brought up time and time again because, Sioux Falls, it's really cool what's going on here. If you look at a map, you can say, well, it's close enough to Minneapolis. Maybe you'd think it's close enough to the Sioux City. It's maybe tied in. But like you said, Rapid City, you draw a circle around Rapid City, and it's hundreds of miles before you run into the next. I don't remember the statistic, but I think the next string orchestra program in the school is 300 miles away or something like. I might be getting that a little bit wrong, but so Rapid City, maybe 10 years ago or thereabouts, they brought their high school orchestra to the ASTA convention, and I believe the Midwest Clinic too. But absolutely as good as anything in the country. And Rapid City, I don't know, 80,000 people on a maybe max, something like that. And just I think it's really cool what you can do in smaller region, with and it's enough of a draw, and that town, it was kind of like a one family operation in terms of string teaching. The dad had been the conductor of the Black Hills Symphony. I think then his son became, and I might be getting this a little bit wrong, so sorry, Rapid City folks, but his son was the high school orchestra director. His wife was the middle school orchestra director, and his daughter taught violin lessons, and they between them all, like they've created a program. It's just kind of I think about that place as many times over the years as just the example of what one person can do. An example I think of from my own childhood is Ray Sidoti here in Sioux Falls. This guy, studied with all kinds of people in the violinist and conductor, and came here, and it's incredible. People my age, in my mid-40s, there are so many people that had gone into music, and they were in the Sioux Empire Youth Symphony working with Ray Sidoti. And he kind of he's just one person and his wife, and they started teaching violin lessons and viola lessons and doing the youth orchestra. And I mean, he's probably one of the main reasons why I have done what I've done. This one guy who decided he's like, nope, setting up shop here. He'd moved around to all these different college jobs, and then the one here fizzled, and he just didn't leave. So.
Played with Ray through high school, and I think the other thing that's been really exciting about both the legacy of Ray Sidoti and in Rapid City is there's a danger of one person that's really passionate getting something rolling, and that's when they stop, it's done. Oftentimes. But what's been able to happen in both Sioux Falls and Rapid City because other people were inspired and other people have stayed, and they've been able to keep that moving forward and keep that progressing. There's always bumps along the road and the transitions as one thing's kind of fading and the next thing's coming in, but they've been able to take that passion and continue into the next generation and not let that momentum totally die out.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing to do. Yeah, there's the Des Moines Metro Opera, and I'm blanking on everybody's name today apparently, but there's one person who was teaching at Indianola College and started this, and it became this big opera company with a training program and everything. It was like he was the conductor, he was the vocal coach, he was the every single thing he did, and as he was getting older, they realized, all right, we've built actually quite a full 5-6 week summer season with this one person. They managed to move it on to the next generation, but it's tricky because you have those people that are just those charges to a community, and they can really create something special. But then that's another skill, is to how to figure out how to transition from that kind of one person driven energy and keep it rolling.
Yep, very much so. Especially because those organizations are often they're formed around that person's personality and skill set, and so oftentimes people will go, okay, well, let's find another one of that person. You're like, well, that's impossible. You're never going to find the person that's that good of a vocal coach and conductor, for instance. But you need to have some sort of a sustainable structure, which is just, that's the hardest part of the arts, I think, is just to have, especially in small towns in South Dakota, is that it's often volunteer run, and it's really based on really passionate people, and trying to get that next generation to come in and take over is always the hard part.
Yeah, we got that. For years I worked with a wonderful conductor and runs a youth orchestra program called Midwest Young Artists Conservatory. Now, Alan Dennis, bass player, and he started that thing in his living room back in the early 90s, and it's now 5 orchestras, multiple jazz bands, wind ensemble, and I mean he is, and he probably never wants to retire, but at some point, he will have to retire. And so I know that they've been trying to figure out, and he's been trying to figure out how to pass that on. And oftentimes, and I'm sure in this group, you're not going to find another Alan Dennis. There is no other Alan Dennis, but you'll find, multiple people to take over those roles. And it's tricky. And and those people often exude a lot of charisma that's how they got there, and that can be a reason why the audience has followed along to try to keep that whole thing going and tell the story and keep people engaged and draw them in. It's a challenge anywhere. Probably even more so in a smaller market because you have just fewer potential people to draw in.
Yeah, definitely. And you're sometimes fighting an uphill battle of just, I think, not to dwell on the pandemic, but it's been, I think that many people found, the first thing we all turned to was the arts for whatever, for a lot of, for comfort, for entertainment, for whatever. And yet it's still culturally seen as a nicety in many areas. It's the bonus. It's not the core of human existence. And I think that both, both the economic impacts and just the social impacts of the arts. You can see that in communities where with the say the pavilion not being able to do in-person shows. Of course everyone was shut down, but then restaurants lose business. It's this trickle effect, and of course it's more than the economic impact. But that's one tool we can use to the people that don't understand the pure arts impacts.
Well, dang, if you ever wanted to realize the difference between putting together your own portfolio career, freelance jobs and that, versus someone with a salary job, boy, just like my observations the last 18 months. And not every salary job has been so great. My friends in the Met have had a pretty rough year, but to most of the people I've talked with over the last year that have had salary jobs, they've pretty much everybody's taken a cut, but they come out the other side. My freelance friends, I had to play this bass quartet in March 2020. That was the last time I've played my own bass outside of my house still. And then at the end of the summer, we all had a Zoom chat, and like all three of them were thinking about other careers because and especially the three people I was talking to, none of them hold down primary contracts. So they're usually freelancing, or a show comes in, and so it's like, all right, even when things start up again, when's the next time the Berkeley Symphony is going to use a sub, or so it's like extra. It's always a challenge to be a creative artist and to make a living, particularly I think in the United States. But like, boy, what's it been like for folks just in terms of that here? Like, it's been rough.
It's been rough.
Yeah.
In a weird way, South Dakota, for better or worse, was a little bit. We've never shut down quite as fully as many places, but definitely still did. And I think that it's just been really tough mental health for performers, because now it's not only are we out of money, but we're also out of one of our primary expressive outlets that helps us process and deal with life. It was also a double hit. A lot of performing artists and visual artists, it's like this everywhere. A lot of them, if you have a day job at service industry, because that's a really flexible thing, you can easily get out of shifts to go do, you're going to do a couple week tour, you're going to do X, Y, or Z. Well, the service industry also got hit. So it was really rough. The good part was, in South Dakota, communities tended to rally around each other. That's one thing, that a lot of smaller communities are really good at, is just supporting each other, that are the people that are already there. And so that helped. But no, it was just brutally difficult for everybody. Even like you were saying, salaried players taking cuts, but luckily, there was a lot of innovation too. In no way was it a silver lining, not that good of an outcome, but a lot of people found a lot of new and novel ways to either keep teaching, to keep performing, to do as many virtual things as we could, even though, a good friend of mine is like, if I ever hear the word pivot again, I'm going to lose my mind, and you know what I mean? Yeah. But yeah, it was just brutal for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, in the crazy town I live in, San Francisco, and then talking to friends in New York and maybe a few other places where it's like, as an artist, it's not like things were going awesome anyway for most people. Like everybody is always, I think, ever since San Francisco was founded, I think people said, "Oh, you missed it. 5 years ago it was great. Now it's crap." So, but talking to musicians that lived there for a long time, is like every club almost had closed, and the tech scene had, and so. In my subjective, view of that place, things have almost, it's like they were pretty grim for artists anyway, and in a way, like the vacating of so many places like I've actually seen more indie businesses open, and a couple of my freelance musician friends now, they're like, I have more work than I've had in years. And that might not be totally true, but they're it's been interesting to see. So we'll see what happens in some of those bigger places that have gotten.
Just really insane. And the other thing I think is it's really reminded a lot of artists, again, for better or worse, we often try not to identify as quote unquote business people. Partially it's partially an identity thing. Like, that's not, I worked a corporate gig for a couple of years right after college, and thank goodness I got out of it when I did, because I would have been dead by now probably. But so when that's what you associate with, is this uncreative endeavor. But as musicians, especially as freelancers, if you don't have a salaried gig with an orchestra, say, you're an entrepreneur the whole way. And so I think that the it can maybe sound like a trite answer, but the people that really weathered it the best have been the ones that have had a diverse set of activities. You don't just perform, you also teach, you also sub here, you do this, you do that. You're probably a key example of that, of just, your feet in a lot of different fires. And so that's what kind of allows when one thing sort of dips a little bit. Now, of course, the pandemic, everything dipped, but still, at least there's a little bit of a multiple source coming through.
Yeah, I've definitely been inadvertently preparing for a pandemic for a long time. So like my mental health took a dip as I sat at home slowly going insane. But otherwise, financially, business-wise, I was probably came out better than a lot of folks or less affected. But it's, the tragic, maybe, I don't know, but like especially if you think about for a second, like especially the classical world, where like if you are gunning for one of those top 5 orchestra jobs or something like that, your focus to do that. I mean, it's like winning a medal at the Olympics or something. It's like making the Olympic team, and then beyond that even. And so, of course, you're not starting 5 side businesses and doing this or that. So just like the especially colleagues at the Met, watching them just be like totally out of work. It's like you've focused so much for so many years, and so it's crazy. But I think even talking to Chris still from the LA Phil, who has a side hustle, Honesty Pill, and some other musicians in major orchestras. Nathan Cole, also, I don't know, maybe it's an LA thing, but he's one of the title chair players in the first violins, has a whole other side business. I think if you ever need an example of why you might want to have something on the side, even just to mix it up and have have something more creative going on.
Because that's one thing that's really hard for, I think, a lot of creative people, is that once your creativity becomes your profession, it can be difficult for it to not feel like the equivalent of it's 5 and I'm checking out. You know what I mean? Like sometimes when it's like we're lucky that we get to play our instruments for a living, but then sometimes you're like, I'm kind of tired of X, Y, or Z. It's no longer a play, and so having something like that's one thing I've been playing a little bit more guitar again, and that's one thing that's been a lot of fun because I'm not supposed to be good at it, so I can just sit down and goof around and not sit there and going, okay, no, I got to get back. My thumb position has gone to crap. I got to get back on this. You can just sit down and truly play like a child again, and so having some other passion, hobby, creative music, otherwise for creative folks, I think is really important.
You know what I've been doing, and I go through phases where I've been on a phase of doing this pretty consistently, is at the end of every day, I break out Ableton Live and my Ableton Push 2. And most of the time, and I love using that, but most of the time, I don't really want to. I just want to watch YouTube videos and do nothing. But I do that, and then I get into it, and it's such a great way to end the day, and it's it's like nobody's expecting or asking me to do this. I'm not expected to produce anything from this. It's just, but I feel so refreshed when I do that, and I start, and all of a sudden I'll lose myself. I look up, it's like 45 minutes have gone by, and then I'll maybe I save it, maybe I don't, but that's been a really nice thing for me. And I think guitar or anything that's not like something you feel like you're supposed to do, that can be good.
Yeah, and then you bring a lot of that, like it kind of, not that I've ever not enjoyed playing bass. It's an instrument that I love for a lot of reasons. But I think then you can bring some of that passion. Like it reminds you, it's sort of like being both an electric and an upright bass player. When you see this all the time. Like Esperanza Spalding, once she started playing a lot of electric bass again, her upright playing totally changed. All of a sudden you're like, okay, there's all the ghost notes that and I think that it's like that with other creative things. Just when you or it's like a. What's the old trope about the rock band where it's like by the third record it's all just songs about life on the road and now no one cares about it anymore, you know what I mean? So you need to have a life as well to bring back to your creative work.
Yeah. Do you now? And now you've got a young member of the family, so I think things are out the door. But like, just in general, do you like schedule time to work on new tunes or work on it? Like, do you keep to a schedule? And I know it's tricky when you have so many things and you're working at night. You've got rehearsals with other musicians, but do you have some sort of schedule you try to adhere to in terms of?
So that's been like a lifelong dilemma in a way. Yeah. In part because I find that scheduling my time is the only way I can get it done. But then I rebel against myself and I get mad that I scheduled all this stuff. I'm sure a lot of other creatives have that kind of experience. But no, I think that while you can't schedule creativity. You can't say, I'm going to sit down for a half hour and I'm going to do something cool. But you can schedule the space to get into that mindset, you know? And so I think that that's been the only way I've been able to otherwise I get lost in just, I've got this gig coming up. I've got to learn these 5 tunes and it's triage, you know? So the only way to work on new music, whether it's compositionally or playing, is to schedule that time in and to say, okay, I'm going to give, and now with, 5-month-old in the house, that's all changed. And so I'm trying to find a new normal for that. But the nice part is my wife loves music. She's very creative herself. She grew up with a father that played and toured and did quite a bit of weekend gigging, and so but had a good experience with it. And so she knows, like, okay, yep, I understand you're going to be gone a little bit, and so she's been super supportive. And yeah, it's that scheduling thing, but then sometimes, like you were saying too, it's like I just want to sit down and watch a YouTube video or watch a show but that's when I've got the time to try to work on some stuff.
Yeah, I think all that YouTube time or downtime, I think that stuff's really important. I try to make sure, because I will get obsessed with something. I'll spend, but I find if I work too much one day, it affects my mojo the next day. Yeah, 100%. And so I try to leave myself like, oh, I could do more, but I'm going to leave it. Yep. And that's a tough thing. And also, I know I break my own rules semi-regularly, but of course. When you're right, I just think how people write is interesting. I don't really write much, but besides like bass exercises. But sure. Do you like start at the bass? Do you start in front of Finale or Sibelius, or on the guitar or piano, or are you singing? Like do you have, or is it ideas come to you in the shower and you? So like do you have any sort of kind of standard way that when you're creating stuff?
Yeah, you know, for me, it's probably 3 particular ways. Honestly, for me, most of the time it is at the bass. Not necessarily a bass line, but usually it's at the bass for melodic ideas, for harmonic ideas. And then the second is very less often. It is just ideas in the shower, and then you just hope you get to the memos app on the phone before it's gone. But then, for me personally, I've found that I want to do more of that. Maybe this is an excuse. It's a you know, the lack of self esteem or something. But I think I often work better with other people. And so, like, more often than generating the ideas, I think I'm better at taking the kernel of an idea and then expanding it and going from there. And so oftentimes for me, it'll start with the stuff that I've worked on that I like the most is I've come up with the kernel and then put it aside for a little bit and then come back to it almost as if I just found it somewhere else, and then can respond to it and react to it and have that kind of dialogue with the musical idea.
Yeah, that's. I think I wonder if bass players maybe, because we're collaborative, kind of by nature. Yep. Maybe that you know.
You know, it's like I had a friend that was like, well, why don't you go do like a solo bass gig when there was in between a couple of bands? It's like, no, I mean, Victor Wooten even will do that for a half hour only because he's smart enough to know that that's all anybody wants, even other bass players, you know. And that's one thing that I really enjoyed too. That's why I think I was drawn to, I haven't been doing it as much for a while, but I for a while was doing more and more conducting, especially of chamber music. And I think as a bass player, I think there's a reason a lot of bass players are fine conductors is we've had some space. Twofold, we have to be supportive. Mm-hmm. You know, that's our role, is to really be listening. We can't just sit there and get lost in playing the melody because we're supporting the rest of the ensembles. But then we also have time to really listen, and we have time to really work on tone and time and playing together with you know, or like, piano accompanists get this too, where it's like, you know, you work with, not to rag on vocalists, but you work with a number of vocalists that you have to just jump and follow around, and you get pretty good at finding these other ways of interacting with musicians. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the conducting thing is fascinating. I've thought about that a lot.
Yeah.
And why, I've always thought part of it's because of the structural nature of what we do.
Yep.
Part of it's that we're sitting back there, soaking it all in, not as many notes. I think that maybe there's a reason why, first violinists don't become conductors as much. They just have a lot more work, to do right up there, and you're like in it. But that's something I've always been curious about. But that's cool. When did you get into doing that? Was that more recently, or have you always?
That was more at the tail end of college, and then after I was at one point I was debating even going to graduate school for conducting, and thinking especially with an ultimate goal more of being more collegiate level instructor of some sort. But I think at the time what really drew me to it was it combined it's still performative. But it's also educational and leadership, and it was kind of a way of combining a lot of passions. And for me in the orchestral world especially, I'm a score geek. You know what I mean? Like I'm the bass player that's always bringing the PDF or the score to the rehearsals and digging through to see, like you were saying, where we fit in. How are we changing the harmonic structure and what's happening? And so I think that was really exciting for me to be able to be a little deeper into that world, and to just get into the nitty-gritty details and how you can take this literature that you would think there's no new way to perform some of these works, but to find with this group in this hall for this reason, this is how we're going to do it, and to find a way to say something new, with existing literature is really interesting to me.
Yeah, and it's something that I have really been interested to, like, I've been fortunate enough to sub with the San Francisco Symphony a decent amount, and you pull out something like, I haven't done Beethoven 5 with them, but let's just say something like Beethoven 5. One would think there is nothing to say about Beethoven 5, yet the whole group in the country, they're like, all right, let's just talk about this, maybe we should try this, maybe we should think about this, and you think, like, really, one of the most, if ever there were a piece that, aside from maybe the opening, and how you fit it together would just kind of go, but it's interesting at the most professional levels, you're still finding that curiosity, and you'd think that people would just have the way that they do it. But that's something I have really enjoyed conducting, and now these days I'm clinics every once in a while, which is a lot of fun. I get to scratch that itch, but it's really interesting. It's like a combination of a whole bunch of things, and it really affected the way I think about even bass playing, but certainly like balance and I got into conducting around the same time I got into teaching electronic music, and it really made me think a lot about both things. Made me think a lot about like balance and tone and timbre and structure, and
that's one thing that's really interesting. I think that electronic musician, if they say like in a way progressive metal or heavy metal kind of took the place of the flourish, you know what I mean? They took the pure technical exercise, but I think electronic music really took orchestration to the next level, because that's so much of what it is. If you have a slowly progressing, so many dance tracks were inspired by Terry Riley or Steve Reich or Philip Glass to begin with, but then it's all about that tone and timbre and mixtures of instruments and of sounds. And that's actually another thing that I'm kind of excited about here in Sioux Falls. So Augustana University is now adding kind of a more music entrepreneurship program. We've got a great dean. It's a full school of music now, which is exciting, and they're going to be avid certified, so they're going to start teaching, Pro Tools and Media Composer.
Cool.
And, so it'll do a number of things, one of which is just those are great skills for any modern musician to have. But then also it's going to entice some students that maybe are adjacent to the classical world and either bring them into the fold or have that parallel track for some other folks. But that tone and timbre is something, I think that's just another thing that bass players, you would think that we're a fairly, compared to say an oboe where the tonal characteristics you can get are so diverse, but I do think that bass players really focus on tone, because in a jazz setting the attack that you get on the front end of your note is everything as far as really progressing the rhythm of the band, so your tone is important for everything. You'd
think like, wow, plucking a string, how differently can one do that? But this friend of mine, Chris Fitzgerald, who teaches in Louisville, Kentucky, he's done these these great YouTube videos of deep dive. He teaches at the Jamie Aebersold camp.
Oh,
so
yeah.
he's done these videos with Rufus Reed and a bunch of other people. I'm blanking on every name today,
yeah.
but and so he did one that was like everybody's approach to the right hand.
Yes. Yep.
And it was amazing. Lynn Seaton, and it was amazing how different it really is, both in terms of the tone and their approach. And you'd think if you weren't really living in that world, it's like pluck, string, done. But it's incredible how much. And I mean, it's amazing how many ways there are to do it, how passionate bass players are about like.
I think that bowing is more complicated, but for jazz and folk and bluegrass and things, I mean, you're right, that's your bow, and that's the way of getting the different colors and the subtlety to it. And in a weird way, it's almost more important to have some of that subtlety because we don't have the sustain. We don't have the ability to change the envelope of the note as much as you do with the bow. And so I think that it becomes really, really critical for plucked players in particular. Yeah, it's just it's so exciting that, again, an instrument that's been around for so long, and you would think that everything's been done, you can still create a unique voice, and you can still be identifiable and unique.
I'm still hearing pieces, and especially as I continue to explore and see what people are doing on the solo bass front, and I agree with you. 30 minutes of solo bass, and I'm about done too. Even if it is Victor Wooten, but I still am continually amazed. It's I didn't know you could get that sound, and I'll go over to the bass. I'll try that. It's I didn't know that harmonic would work that way with that note and make that imply that chord. And it's cool. Yeah, you'd think 4 strings tuned in fourths most of the time. We figured it all out. But it's really interesting.
Well, and we, as long as the instrument has been around, we don't have as much of a depth of literature. It's for instance, it's why I wish I could play. I wish there was more than the Trout Quintet. You know what I mean? But I will say too, not just because you're here, but that I'm really excited with a lot of the publication work that you've been doing. That's been already really helpful. Discovered some new pieces, discovered some things for both students and other pros, and that kind of encouragement of transcriptions and new work has been really exciting. Playing the Glass Metamorphosis, I think was one of the first ones that I picked up off the shop. But
that's awesome.
So it's having more and more literature just to open up. There's more we can do with this instrument and helping show people that.
Oh, thanks, man. That's great. Going back to entrepreneurial ideas, all credit goes to my colleague Trevor Jones on that. That was one of those that never would have happened without him saying, you know what we should try? And we've tried a bunch of things, and 4 out of 5 don't work. Sure. And you're moving on, but that one seems to have clicked. And it's been fun. It's been fun for me too to think, I should learn that. I should try that and dig into that. Yeah, it's exciting, and it's an exciting instrument to play, and bass players just tend to be tinkerers. I think we're a little more than a great example is Mark Dresser, who I just think he's so amazing. And what he with amplifying, putting these I think they're piezo pickups, if I remember right, into the fingerboard and amplifying the back length of the strings. So you put your left hand down and what's behind there, and he's gone way down the rabbit hole and mapped out all these different things you can do. And it's it's incredible. It's incredible how much territory there is to explore. Yeah. Still.
Yep. Well, and every instrument, we're kind of, as things get academicized, I'm an academic, I love that, but I do see the way it can stifle something. So now we start to think this instrument has always been 4 strings, it's always been roughly this size and shape, and especially bass compared to a lot of instruments, it's all over the place with number of strings, with string length, with approach. I mean, even just the fact that we still have 2 different types of bows. I mean, there's very few other instruments that have that drastic of a difference in approach. And so I think that leads to a lot of us being tinkerers and trying stuff out because our instrument doesn't seem quite as immutable as some others do.
Right. Yeah. It's all the shapes, all the size, all the number of strings, the tuning, extension yes, extension no, extended fingerboard yes, extended fingerboard no, holes in the side of the bass to hear, like Arnold Schnitzer's doing, bend end pins, angled end pins drilled in the back, suitcase bass like Gary Upton is doing. You can literally take your bass apart and fit it in a standard Samsonite suitcase. So there's a lot to be done for something that's been around for a few hundred years.
Yep.
Hey man, this has been great.
Yeah,
what a great way to get back back into doing a live chat. We could have done this over Zoom, but I appreciate it. So where should I send folks?
Yeah, so probably I would just go to andrewreinartz.com, and then you can get a link to a number of the other bands and projects from there, as well as just some other information generally about what's going on.
Oh my goodness. How great to chat with you, Andrew. Folks, check out what he's up to at andrewreinartz.com. And it's so great to chat and so great to do this again in person. I have missed that. We talked about it in the interview here. While there's nothing wrong with Zoom, and I am sure I'll continue doing remote conversations in some capacity off and on for years to come, I had such a great time getting into this mode of pretty much only doing the podcast in person. I think that the hang is obviously better, and it's just kind of a fun restriction to place on the show. It's like, we're going to chat, but it's only going to be in person. So we'll see where we go with that. That has not been an option really for the last year and a half, but I see that happening more in the future. And like we were also talking about in the chat, living in a place like I do, San Francisco, a lot of people come through here, so it's a great opportunity to get together. And I do a lot of traveling. Typically, not so much for the last year and a half, but I've been getting on the road more, as you can just hear from this conversation. And so much more of this. That's a very long way, meandering way in this outro of saying much more of this to come in the future. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I'm back here in San Francisco. It is a whopping 70 degrees Fahrenheit, very standard August San Francisco temperature. I am headed back to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, randomly to do a teacher in service for Eastman Music Company, the company that I work for. Going to be going and working with the Sioux Falls Public Schools, some of the orchestra teachers there, and that's super cool. The only reason I'm playing bass today is because of those teachers in the Sioux Falls Public School system. So how cool a few decades later to go back and do that, and much more travel coming up in the future. Let's see what is coming. I believe we got a South Texas trip, Georgia Marim. We're going to be doing a 9/11 tribute concert. That was 20 years ago at this point, which is crazy, and going to be doing some recording for Discover Double Bass in Nashville, Tennessee. This is September we're looking at. What else have we got going on? Going to Chicago in November just to hang out mainly, and then going back in December for the Midwest Clinic, and I've got a few other trips in there. As I get back to being on the road, I'm trying to remember that there is a balance to too much on the road and not enough on the road. I've definitely been going stir crazy, losing my mind in San Francisco again, as I brought up with Andrew in this conversation. But now that travel has come back, I'm realizing that sometimes it's good to be home. And I had a wonderful time starting off the week here. It's a Tuesday as I record these outros. I do them four at a time. This is 1 of 4, so I will get less cogent as I do these, I'm sure, for the next 20 minutes here or 30 minutes. But it was so nice. It was great to be on the road. It was great to visit home, South Dakota home, like home, I guess, well, I don't know what that means, childhood home. But it was also great to be back in San Francisco and these crisp mornings and be out on my balcony with a cup of coffee and just being able to set aside whatever time I want for the various projects. So been working on some new videos for the YouTube channel, been working obviously on the podcast here and booking some more guests, been working all sorts of things. So yeah, that's all I think I have to say for this. I will close out here and thank the team that helped me to put these together. Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, and Trevor Jones. Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. I am your host, Jason Heath. So happy to do these. So happy that you're listening to these, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.